Hi, Gary Zacharias here with the Apologist Bookshelf. You know, I've been around long enough that I can remember when being a Christian was considered a positive thing, and people may not have agreed, but they were polite. And then it went through a period of time where it was kind of neutral. Some people thought Christianity was fine and others didn't, but they still kept fairly quiet about it. But what are we living in now? It's actually a pretty negative world. And that brings me to the title of the book that I wanted to share with you. It's by Renn, R-E-N-N. It's called Life in the Negative World, subtitled Confronting Challenges in an Anti-Christian Culture. So did you hear that last part? An anti-Christian culture. Yeah, so this book is new. It came out 2024. And I was just looking at the back cover, and then we'll go to a couple of chapters here, but it says there are ways to live with integrity and follow Christ today, even in a negative world. Some of the comments of people in the back here, Rod Dreher, who's the author of The Benedict Option and Live Not by Lies. By the way, I've got that book. I'm going to tackle that one next. But here's what Rod Dreher said. Renn's insights guide my own thinking about fidelity under fire. Life in the Negative World is both a work of practical hope and a book for serious believers learning how to be strangers in a strange land. Does that sound familiar? That was an old Robert Heinlein book, Stranger in a Strange Land. And that's where we are. That's where we are today. So the author, Renn, takes a look at Christian cultural engagement over the past and says what worked and what didn't work and what we can think about for the future as far as strategies for churches and institutions and us as individuals. How to live faithfully in a negative world, not just a world that is politely indifferent to Christianity, but it's a culture opposed to Christian value and teaching. And this is something I'd like to work up myself to do a talk on sometime. So, Life in the Negative World got a good write-up. I looked at this from, I think it was a magazine, World Magazine. I really like World Magazine, so I'd like to put a little plug in here. World Magazine is kind of a time magazine for Christians, and one of the things they do are they cover books. And so they mentioned this book. I thought, well, that sounds good. So I got a hold of it, read it, and it is good. So he lays out three areas of what people can do confronting this negative world. So he has a personal section of the book, how to live and structure individual lives. He has an institutional section, what the churches can do, and parachurch ministries and colleges, Christian colleges, and Christian-owned businesses. And then he's got a third area of the book, the last third, he calls it missional. He says ways to carry out the Great Commission with evangelization and by loving our neighbors. And so that's what this is going to cover. He, as he introduces the book here, these strategies, he says, one of the things I love about the Bible is its realism. It's true to life. It doesn't sugarcoat reality. And he said, that's the same for us. He said, so now, what are we living in? We should be realistic. It's a negative world environment we live in. But he said, that doesn't mean we become fatalistic or sit back on our hands and say, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. He said, we can do a lot of things. We've got to adapt to this negative world. He said there are ways for us to create churches that can thrive. He said maybe pressure will make the evangelical church here in America take our faith seriously. Yeah, I think about China. You know, Mao came in, put a lot of pressure on any Christian organization, and people on the outside thought, oh, that's going to be the end of Christianity in China. No, it's flourishing. So I think he's right. He says new opportunities for evangelism will present themselves because of the world's abandonment of truth. I want to take just a second and focus on that because I think that's crucial. New opportunities for evangelism. So we look out and we see people doing some things that just fly in the face of reality. They are living and talking and trying to succeed by doing things that go against human nature, that go against human flourishing. And so we're going to see, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of disasters. We're going to see a lot of people crashing in flames. And the world has abandoned truth, and we can be there and be there as a beacon and to show people there is a better way out. He also says, again, this is just starting the main part of the book. He said, now we're living in a negative world. He said, that doesn't mean evangelicalism is going to suffer a slow death. He said, evangelicals, if you look at the past, they've been adaptable to changing times. Now he says evangelicalism today is a product of other successful adaptations. When times in the past have put a stranglehold on Christianity or whatever. And so he said, we're just going to follow the lead of our mighty and faithful God. He said, we can successfully adapt to this next phase. So remember, he said there are going to be 3 sections to the book. Personal, just how we can deal ourselves with this world. Institutional, how our churches and colleges and things like that can deal effectively. And then missional, how to carry out the Great Commission by loving and taking care of neighbors. So let's just start the first part here, living personally. So let's do the first one. I don't think we'll have time to do a whole lot of it, but he starts off with a challenge. He said, we all have to ask ourselves a very simple question. How serious am I about doing what the Bible says? He said, we've sat and we've heard pastors talk and we've read things with all sorts of instructions from Scripture. But he said, have we really considered the weight and significance of what they ask of us? He says, Jesus said we need to count the cost of our faith. He quotes from Luke 14, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. And he says, how many of us have really considered whether our faith might, for example, cost us a job? Maybe it'll make a barrier for us to advance in our profession. He said there may not have been costs in previous generations, but he said even 20 years ago we couldn't imagine it, but it's there now. He said, let's be honest here. How many of us would really count all things as loss for the sake of Christ? That's what Paul said. He said, I consider them garbage to gain Christ. He said that was hard enough for Paul's hearers to do when life was nasty, brutish, and short. But he said life is pretty amazing here. If you're middle income, doing well, he said most American Christians haven't been in danger of losing all they have for the sake of Christ. That's true. He said the Bible challenges us. It says in John 14:15 that our willingness to obey Christ's commands is an outward sign of what's going on the inside. Do we really have faith? Then we're supposed to obey what Christ said. He says we should be all in. When it comes to exercising our faith, we should be trusting the word of Christ and working hard to demonstrate it by obeying Jesus' commands. That's building our lives on a sure foundation. He said one thing we can do, we should be pursuing holiness, actively cleansing ourselves of every defilement, not just the select ones we care about personally on our favorite list. But I think that's so crucial because we've heard Christian after Christian in the news who preaches one thing but then lives a different kind of life. We should be different from the world. There should be something different about us. Not weird, but just we live a different lifestyle. We spend our money differently. We watch different kinds of movies. We talk differently when we're around friends. And I do a talk on worldviews, and I think many Christians have 2 different worldviews. They live Christianly on Sunday because they sing the songs and they share Bible verses in the Sunday morning class and they listen to a pastor. But then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they have a separate worldview. They adopt the secular worldview. And the way they spend their money, the way they spend their time, the things they talk about with their friends are pretty much what the world does. And so they've changed values. And so here the author, Renn, is saying we should cleanse ourselves of every defilement. We should get on the bandwagon here being what a Christian is supposed to be. He said it's really tempting to take some of Jesus' commands. Oh, okay, I'll obey those, and the others, maybe not. He says Jesus doesn't give that option. He said the message from Jesus is to be all in on our faith, to live out the Christian life in every place God has put us. See, that's back to that worldview issue again. We should be Christians at our job. We should be Christians in our home. We should be Christians during leisure time activities. We're supposed to be all in. So I think that's really important. He said, today's world says you want to be accepted and you're going to identify as a Christian. Well, you need to bring your doctrine into alignment with the world's standards. Compromise a little bit. Don't be out on the limb there. Oh, that seems really harsh. Jesus was big on rejecting that. He said to the church in Laodicea in Revelation, you're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were one or the other, but you're lukewarm. I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. Yeah, so he said, the gospel is not good advice, it's good news. And the ultimate rock of our life in a negative world has to be Jesus Christ. So we've got to take that challenge. I thought that was really powerful. So he said then, the first challenge, as a person, individual, American evangelical in the negative world, we ought to examine ourselves, considering our ways and counting the costs and committing ourselves to denying ourselves. I think that is so crucial, really examining the cost, he says, taking up our crosses and following Christ in everything. Because as he finishes the chapter, he says, if we aren't solid in our faith, nothing else we do will ultimately be of any consequence. We have to be fully committed to our faith and obedient to Jesus' words. He said we have to train our hearts and our minds to hear his words and do what they say. And then he ends the chapter, as the well-known hymn reminds us, our solid rock is Christ. That's what we stand on. All other ground is sinking sand. So there's the first challenge. Remember, this is the section where he's going to talk about personal things that we can do and the ways we should live. So I'm going to continue a little bit on another chapter, the next chapter. He calls it Become Excellent. Now, it seems kind of obvious, but I thought that was a good place to go to next. He references Mark Noll's book that came out in 1994 called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. In his view, Noll, his scandal was that evangelicals didn't seem to have much of a mind at all. They couldn't apply Christian thought to the intellectual domains of society. Yeah, they were not being intellectual. He says Pentecostalism is trying to get out there and is a fast-growing Christian movement because it speaks to and helps people who have real sin and bondage in their lives. It's not just an intellectual process here. It says even among evangelicals who have intellectual credentials, they don't really seem to have evidence of how Christianity informs their work. So he says excellence, by the way, he says excellence is not the same as godliness, but it should be a goal. We can be godly. Nothing wrong. That's huge. We need to be godly. Remember, he talked about pursuing holiness, being obedient to Christ, caring for the poor, evangelizing neighbors. That's great. He said at the same time we can cultivate excellence in all that we do, including the intellectual life of the mind. And that's, of course, where apologetics comes in. I have spent years being fascinated with the world of apologetics and how many ways there are to defend the Christian faith from attacks and how much confidence we can have in the truth of Christianity. But I know over and over again, just talking to various Christians, a lot of them can't give reasons why they believe there's a God. They may not have reasons to believe why they would trust the New Testament. Just simple things like that. So he says we need a Christian mind project. And he references Tim Keller here. I love listening to Tim Keller's sermons. He did such a great job. And he was talking about renewing the American evangelical church. And he said there were 7 areas that we need to renew the church, and one of them was the Christian Mind Project. Now, here's what Keller had to say. I put a little star here because I like Keller and I like this comment. Evangelicalism has a strongly anti-intellectual cast to it that has to be overcome, Keller says, without losing its appeal to the majority of the population. How do you do that? We've got to get more Christians on faculties. We need a robust intellectual culture for Protestantism. We've got to get more Christian public intellectuals. He said we've got to promote believers into the existing intellectual and cultural economy. We've got to get them into progressive universities. We've got to get them into conservative think tanks. He said we've got to create a kind of alternate cultural economy for scholarship and intellectual work. So that's powerful. And back to Renn, he said, yes, we need intellectual development. He said, beyond academic scholarship. So we're talking about that. But he said, in other vocational domains as well. So he said, just take something like, and here's his one example, physical fitness. He said, many websites are devoted to physical fitness. Yeah, they are. Yet few of them appear to be written by anybody who's a Christian. And what they dole out is usually from a non-Christian perspective. He said, we need people who can give us information about health and fitness, but that should be informed by a Christian worldview, part of our stewarding our bodies, being healthy and strong enough to be a blessing, not for vanity, not to show off. And he said, you can think about that example, that area, in a lot of other domains. He said, Christians should be at the forefront. He said, the problem is evangelicals don't really typically value or pursue genuine excellence. They don't assert institutional or professional leadership, and that needs to change. He said, for example, evangelicals are pretty much missing, he says, from senior leadership positions in conservative think tanks. He said, majority, as of 2022 at least, majority of leaders in these institutions were Catholic or Jewish. He said, conservatism has had kind of a Catholic slant since the time Buckley founded National Review. He said, by and large, evangelicals haven't developed the skills necessary, and they haven't had the orientation toward obtaining leadership positions in these kinds of organizations. And he said the same thing in the legal world. He said evangelicals have been famously absent from the Supreme Court. He said it's often the Catholics who have more intellectual gifts and all and been involved in it more. He said his point is that evangelicals tend to lack a presence in these areas, and unless this improves, we're going to be in a subordinate role all throughout our society because others are going to set the rules that we live by. Toward the end of the chapter, Renn says that what's unique about this negative world is that it just doesn't reject Christianity, but it rejects natural law, the way things are built and maintained in this universe. So, for example, he says the ideas of the family have been rejected, but more than that, even the biological reality of gender has been tossed. Now, he said not all natural law has been rejected. Murder is still mostly regarded as wrong, and we still do have the idea of law. He said, actually, if you think about it, the society is highly legalistic and harsh if one transgresses that new social morality. So he says, this is a challenge that evangelicalism faces. We need excellence. Now, we've got to have stakes in this society. He said the leadership classes reject Christian doctrines, but they also reject even the broader moral and ethical framework that was one time shared between mainline and evangelical Christianity. So that's sad. He said, for Christians today, the intellectual leaders of our society are less reliable, and they're less trustworthy than they once were. So we can't rely on those people anymore, or for their wisdom or their judgments. Okay, so I'm going to stop at that point. He's got another section coming up that I like a lot, reasons for evangelicals to pursue excellence. So we'll tackle that in a future podcast here. So this book, again, Life in the Negative World. First part is Welcome to the Negative World. And then he gets into those three parts we were talking about. We're going through the part called Living Personally. The second part is Leading Institutionally. And the last part, Engaging Missionally. Great challenge to us today. There's no way we can ignore this. We can't say, well, I'll live in a more Christian society. Well, where? How are you going to do that? Go up in the hills, start a commune, 3 or 4 of you? I mean, our society, we have to get realistic. It is a post-Christian America now, and we have to be ready to deal with that. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have a good day, and another podcast is coming soon.